The massive doors of the council chamber opened with a deep rumble that echoed through the halls of Nexus Prime. Ambassador Taeho walked slowly into the enormous room, his black diplomatic uniform looking simple compared to the colorful robes and armor worn by the alien delegates around him. The chamber was so large that clouds formed near its ceiling, and gravity generators hummed quietly to keep everyone comfortable, despite their different homeworlds. Taeho had been preparing for this moment for 3 years. Earth's application. To join the Galactic Council had taken decades of careful planning and negotiation. Now, finally, he stood before representatives from 47 different alien species, each more advanced than humanity in their own ways. Some floated in bubbles of methane gas, others stood on multiple legs that clicked against the metal floor, and a few existed as pure energy contained in crystal shells. The council speaker, a tall being with silver skin and 4 arms, gestured for silence. Her voice came through the translation device that every delegate wore, turning her alien words into perfect human speech. "We gather today to hear from the species called humanity," she announced. "Their planet Earth seeks membership in our council. Ambassador Taeho will present their case." Taeho walked to the center of the chamber, where a small platform waited for him. He looked up at the curved walls where hundreds of alien faces stared down at him. Some looked curious, others seemed bored, and a few appeared hostile. He had studied each species for years, learning their customs and weaknesses, but standing here made him feel very small. "Honored council members," Taeho began, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "I come before you representing the people of Earth. We may be new to space travel compared to your great civilizations, but we offer unique skills and perspectives that could benefit the Council." A low rumbling sound came from the Vorthak section. These bear-like creatures were known for their aggressive nature and powerful military. Their representative, a massive being covered in dark fur, leaned forward in his seat. What could a species that only left their home system 50 years ago possibly offer us? The Vorthak delegate growled. "We have been traveling between stars for thousands of years." Taeho had expected this reaction. "While we may be young in space travel, we have spent millennia perfecting the art of warfare on our own world. We have developed tactics and strategies that might seem simple, but are highly effective." The crystalline Helios delegate flickered with bright colors, which Taeho knew meant amusement. "Tell us about these tactics, human. We are curious about primitive warfare methods." Taking a deep breath, Taeho activated his holographic display. Images of human soldiers appeared in the air above him. "One of our most elite fighting forces are called paratroopers. These warriors jump from aircraft, high in the sky, and land behind enemy lines. They can attack fortresses and strongholds that seem impossible to reach." The chamber fell silent for a moment. Then, slowly, a sound began to build. It started as a low chuckle from the Helios section, then spread to the Vorthak delegates, and soon filled the entire chamber. The aliens were laughing. The laughter grew, louder and more mocking. Some delegates pointed at the holographic images of human paratroopers with their parachutes. Others made gestures that Taeho recognized as signs of disbelief in their cultures. Gravity-assisted suicide! The Helios delegate flashed in bright yellow patterns. Your warriors throw themselves from the sky and hope to survive the landing? The Vorthak representative stood up, his massive frame shaking with laughter. Primitive. Aerial stumbling? Do your soldiers not understand that the sky is meant for flying creatures and aircraft? Even worse mockery came from the insect-like Zerg delegates, whose clicking sounds the translator rendered as, "Falling warriors! How do they aim where they land? Do they simply hope the enemy stands beneath them?" General Vex, the Council's chief, military advisor, rose from his seat. The Krex general was nearly 3 meters tall, with 6 arms and skin like polished stone. His species had conquered half their galaxy before joining the Council peacefully. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had won 1,000 battles. Honored delegates, General Vex said, and the laughter slowly died down. While we should not mock our potential new members, we must be realistic about military capabilities. He turned to look directly at Tae-Ho. These paratroopers might be effective against other primitive ground forces, but they would be useless against any real military installation. The general activated his own holographic display, showing images of Nexus Prime's defenses. This fortress world where we now stand has shields that could vaporize approaching aircraft before they reach our atmosphere. Energy barriers protect every important building. Automated defense systems track and destroy any unauthorized object that moves through our airspace. Even if your falling soldiers somehow survived the approach, they would be detected and eliminated before they touched ground. More murmurs of agreement came from around the chamber. Several delegates nodded their various heads, tentacles, or energy patterns in approval of the general's words. Furthermore, General Vex continued, modern warfare is fought in space, not on planetary surfaces. Ships engage each other across distances measured in light minutes. Ground battles are decided by orbital bombardment and energy weapons that can level mountains. What use are soldiers who must physically travel to their targets by falling through atmosphere? The aquatic depth delegates, whose tank-like suits kept them in pressurized water, made gurgling sounds that translated as agreement. Surface warfare is obsolete, their speaker said. We fought our last ground battle 3,000 years ago. Tae-Ho felt his face grow warm with embarrassment, but he kept his expression calm. He had expected some resistance, but not this level of open mockery. Still, he pressed on with his presentation. Our paratroopers are highly trained in infiltration and special operations, he said. They can reach targets that— Reach targets? Interrupted another Vorthak delegate. By falling on them, what if they miss? Do they simply become scattered across the landscape? More laughter erupted. Tae-Ho noticed that even some of the more diplomatic species were struggling to contain their amusement. The translator was working overtime, turning various alien expressions of humor into sounds he could understand. The energy being from the plasma collective pulsed with bright colors. We appreciate the entertainment, human ambassador, but surely you have more serious military capabilities to discuss. General Vex raised one of his 6 hands for attention. Perhaps we should move beyond these quaint historical curiosities and discuss actual defensive capabilities. Does Earth possess shield technology? Particle beam weapons? Quantum disruption fields? Tejo felt the presentation slipping away from him. We have developed some advanced technologies, but our strength lies in falling soldiers, the Helios delegate interrupted, flashing in patterns that clearly indicated mockery. We understand. The council speaker raised her forearms, calling for order. While this discussion of human military traditions has been educational, we should move to the formal evaluation of Earth's application. The voting began quickly. One by one, species representatives stated their positions. The Vorthak voted no, citing humanity's primitive military doctrine. The Helios delegates voted no, claiming humans lacked sufficient technological advancement. The Krex military faction voted no, with General Vex stating that Earth's defensive capabilities were insufficient to contribute meaningfully to Council security. As the votes were counted, Tejo watched his years of preparation crumble. Species after species rejected Earth's application. A few abstained, but none voted in favor of human membership. The Council has spoken, the Speaker announced. Earth's application for membership is denied. The primary concerns are technological inferiority and questionable military doctrine. General Vex stood once more. Ambassador Tejo, please convey to your leaders that Earth may reapply in 50 years after your species has had time to develop more practical military capabilities. His tone was not unkind, but it carried the finality of absolute certainty. The chamber began to empty as delegates prepared for their next session. Tejo gathered his materials slowly, his mind already working on how to report this failure to Earth. As he walked toward the exit, he heard fragments of conversation in various alien languages, all focused on the amusing concept of human paratroopers. He had no way of knowing that in just a few weeks, one of those primitive falling soldiers would be standing in this very chamber, proving that sometimes the galaxy's greatest military minds could be very, very wrong. Colonel Ji Woo sat in the dark briefing room, watching the recording for the third time. The holographic display showed Ambassador Tejo standing alone in the council chamber, while alien delegates laughed at his presentation. Every time the Vorthak delegate called human paratroopers primitive aerial stumbling, Jiwoo's jaw tightened a little more. The recording ended and the room fell silent. Jiwoo looked around the table at her three top officers. Major Kyung Min, her second in command, had his arms crossed and was staring at the table with barely controlled anger. Captain Hae-Won leaned back in her chair, her face showing the calm expression she always wore before a dangerous mission. Lieutenant Dong-hyun was taking notes, his analytical mind already working on the problem. "Well," Ji-woo said quietly, "now we know what they think of us." Major Kyung-min slammed his hand on the table. "Gravity-assisted suicide? Primitive aerial stumbling? These aliens have no idea what they're talking about." "Actually," Lieutenant Dong-hyun said, looking up. From his notes, they might have a point about traditional airborne operations. Their defensive systems are far more advanced than anything we've faced on Earth. A standard paratrooper drop would be suicide against their energy shields and automated weapons. Kyung-min turned to glare at the younger officer. Whose side are you on, Lieutenant? I'm on the side of facts, Dong-hyun replied calmly. And the fact is that conventional airborne tactics won't work against Galactic Council technology. But that doesn't mean we can't adapt. Ji-woo held up her hand for silence. Dong-hyun is right. We can't beat them using old methods. But maybe we don't need to. She activated her own holographic display, showing classified files that made all. 3 officers leaned forward with interest. For the past 5 years, our research teams have been working on something called quantum phase technology, Ji-woo explained. The basic idea is that matter can exist in multiple dimensional states. At the same time, we've built devices that can shift objects between normal space and what the scientists call phase space. Captain Hae-won studied the technical diagrams floating in the air. What does that mean in practical terms? It means, Ji-woo said with a slight smile, that an object in phase space can pass through solid matter like it doesn't exist. Walls, armor, energy shields, they're all meaningless to something that's phased out of normal reality. The room was quiet as the officers absorbed this information. Major Kyung-min was the first to speak. Are you saying we could walk through their defenses? Not walk, Ji-woo corrected. Fall. She changed the display to show intelligence reports about Nexus Prime. The fortress world appeared as a massive sphere covered in cities, weapons, and shield generators. Our spies in the Council have been gathering information about their most secure facility. General Vex was right about one thing. Their defenses are incredible. Energy shields, particle weapons, gravity manipulators, automated defense systems that could track and destroy a grain of sand moving too fast. Lieutenant Dong-hyun was studying the fortress specifications. But if someone could phase through those defenses... Exactly, Ji-woo said. The aliens are so confident in their technology that they've forgotten the most basic military principle. Every defense has a weakness. Captain Hae-won looked up from the hologram. What kind of mission are we talking about, Colonel? Ji-woo's expression became serious. A demonstration. Something that will make them understand that human paratroopers aren't primitive at all. We're going to prove that their impregnable fortress isn't as secure as they think. She pulled up another set of files, showing the council chamber where Tae-ho had been humiliated. The plan is simple in concept, but extremely difficult in execution. We insert one operative into their most secure facility and have them plant a beacon in the council chamber itself. Nothing harmful, just a device that proves we were there. Major Kyung-min stared at the images of Nexus Prime's defenses. One operative? Against all of that? One paratrooper, Ji-woo emphasized. Using quantum phase technology and traditional, airborne insertion techniques. It sounds impossible, Kyung-min said. Good, Ji-woo replied. That's exactly what we want them to think. Lieutenant Dong-hyun was running calculations on his tablet. The power requirements for quantum phase technology are enormous. How would one person carry enough energy to phase through multiple barriers? Ji-woo activated another display showing a sleek suit of armor. Our engineers have been working on that problem. This is a quantum phase suit, powered by a miniature fusion reactor. It can maintain phase shift for up to 6 hours with the ability to phase in and out of normal space as needed. Captain HFY examined the suit specifications carefully. What about life support, navigation, communications? All built in, Ji-Woo said. The suit has everything needed for a solo infiltration mission. But there's one major limitation. The phase shift technology interferes with normal transportation. Ships, aircraft, even ground vehicles become unstable when quantum phase fields are active. So, how does the operative reach the target? Kyung-min asked. Ji-Woo smiled. The old-fashioned way, they jump. She showed them a new image, a small pod designed to carry a single person. This is a quantum insertion vehicle. It's basically a very advanced drop pod with phase shift capabilities. The operative launches from outside the planetary defense grid and phases through the shields during descent. Lieutenant Dong-hyun looked skeptical. The timing would have to be perfect. One mistake and the operative either bounces off the shields or gets vaporized by the defense systems. That's where our intelligence comes in, Ji-Woo said. She displayed orbital mechanics charts, showing Nexus Prime's position relative to its binary star system. The fortress orbits twin stars, and their gravitational fields create tiny fluctuations in the defensive shields. There are microscopic gaps that open and close in predictable patterns. How microscopic? HFY asked. Big enough for a phased object to pass through if the timing is exact? Ji-Woo replied. Our computers have calculated that there's a window of opportunity lasting exactly 3 minutes and 42 seconds. It occurs once every 73 standard hours. The room fell silent as the officers considered the complexity of the mission. Major Kyung-min shook his head slowly. Colonel, this is beyond dangerous. It's nearly suicide. Nearly, Ji-Woo agreed, but not quite. Our mission planners estimate a 40% chance of success and a 60% chance of death, Kyung-min pointed out. Those are better odds than the Council gave our entire species, Ji-Woo replied. They think we're primitive and worthless. It's time to show them what human ingenuity can accomplish. Captain HFY leaned forward. I volunteer for the mission. Kyung-min turned to stare at her. HFY, did you hear the survival odds? I heard them, she said calmly. I also heard that our entire planet was just rejected by the galactic community because they think we're backward savages. Someone needs to prove them wrong. Lieutenant Dong-hyun looked up from his calculations. Captain HFY has the best record in high-altitude operations. If anyone can make this work, it's her. Ji-Woo studied the young captain's face. HFY had completed over 200 paratrooper missions, including several behind enemy lines during Earth's recent conflicts. She was calm under pressure, excellent at improvisation, and had never failed to complete an objective. Are you sure about this, Captain? Ji-Woo asked. Once you're in that pod, there's no backup plan, no rescue mission if things go wrong. HFY smiled. Colonel, I've been jumping out of perfectly good aircraft my entire career. This is just jumping out of a perfectly good spacecraft instead. Major Kyung-min sighed. When do we start training? Immediately, Ji-Woo said. We have 3 weeks before the next optimal insertion window. Heywan will train with the quantum phase suit and learn everything our spies have discovered about Nexus Prime's layout. Dong-hyun will refine the insertion trajectory and timing calculations. Kyung-min will coordinate with our intelligence assets inside the council. She stood up, and the others followed. Gentlemen, Captain, the galaxy thinks human paratroopers are obsolete relics from a primitive species. Let's show them how wrong they are. As the officers filed out of the briefing room, Ji-woo remained behind, staring at the holographic image of Nexus Prime. In 3 weeks, one of her soldiers would attempt something that the galaxy's greatest military minds considered impossible. She just hoped that human determination and ingenuity would be enough to prove that Earth deserved its place among the stars. Lieutenant Dong-hyun stood at the front of the briefing room, surrounded by holographic displays that showed the Nexus Prime system in incredible detail. Charts, graphs, and orbital mechanics calculations floated in the air around him like a three-dimensional puzzle. Captain Heywan sat at the table, studying every piece of information while Colonel Ji-woo and Major Kyung-min watched from the side. The problem, Dong-hyun began, pointing at the massive fortress world rotating slowly in the center of the display, is that Nexus Prime has the most advanced defensive system in the known galaxy. But every system has patterns, and patterns can be predicted. He waved his hand, and the hologram zoomed out to show the entire star system. 2 bright suns orbited each other in a complex dance, with Nexus Prime following a carefully calculated path between them. The fortress orbits a binary star system, Dong-hyun explained. Most species would consider this a disadvantage because of the unstable gravitational fields. But the Council chose this location specifically because the gravity fluctuations make it almost impossible for attacking fleets to maintain stable formations. Captain Heywan leaned forward. Almost impossible for fleets. What about a single small object? That's exactly the right question, Dong-hyun said with a smile. Large ships get torn apart by the gravitational stress, but something small enough could actually use those same forces as an advantage. He manipulated the display to show energy readings from the planetary shields. The defensive barriers around Nexus Prime are powered by massive generators, but they have to flex and adjust constantly to compensate for the gravitational changes from the binary stars. Every 73 hours and 16 minutes, the gravitational alignment creates a specific pattern. The hologram showed lines of force stretching between the 2 stars and the fortress world. During this alignment, the shield generators have to shift their output to maintain stability. For exactly 3 minutes and 42 seconds, microscopic gaps appear in the barrier. Gaps that are invisible to normal sensors, but large enough for a quantum-phased object to pass through. Major Kyung-min studied the calculations floating nearby. How microscopic are we talking about? About the size of a grain of sand in normal space, Dong-hyun replied. But remember, an object in quantum phase exists partially outside normal dimensions. The effective size of the gaps becomes much larger from a phased perspective. Colonel Ji-woo pointed at the timeline displayed on one of the screens. You said this happens every 73 hours. When is the next window? Dong-hyun checked his calculations. 18 days, 7 hours, and 23 minutes from now. But that's just the beginning of the challenge. He changed the display to show a trajectory path that curved wildly through the star system. Getting to the fortress during that precise window requires launching from specific coordinates at exactly the right time. The operative would need to use gravitational assists from both stars to build up enough velocity while maintaining the correct approach angle. Captain Haywan traced the path with her finger. That trajectory looks like it goes very close to both suns. It does, Dong-hyun confirmed. The operative's pod will pass within 500,000 kilometers of the first star, then use its gravitational field to slingshot toward the second sun, coming even closer, just 300,000 kilometers from its surface. The room was quiet as everyone absorbed the implications. Major Kyung-min was the first to speak. The radiation and heat from getting that close to two stars. The quantum phase suit includes radiation shielding and thermal protection, Dong-hyun said. But the operative will experience temperatures hot enough to melt steel and radiation levels that would kill an unprotected human in seconds. How long does this journey take? Haywan asked. From launch to arrival at Nexus Prime, approximately 14 hours, Dong-hyun replied. Most of that time will be spent in the cold vacuum between the stars, but the passes near each sun will last about 30 minutes each. Colonel Ji-woo walked closer to examine the trajectory. What happens if the timing is off by even a few seconds? If the launch is too early, the operative arrives before the shield gaps open and impacts the barrier at nearly 10% of light speed, Dong-hyun said matter-of-factly. If the launch is too late, the gaps close before arrival, and the same thing happens. And if the trajectory calculation is wrong, Kyung-min asked, then the operative either falls into one of the stars or misses Nexus Prime entirely and continues into deep space, Dong-hyun replied. The margin for error is essentially zero. Haywan studied the path more carefully. What kind of speeds are we talking about? Peak velocity during the second gravitational assist will reach approximately 30,000 kilometers per second, Dong-hyun said. At that speed, the operative will be moving fast enough to cross Earth's diameter in about 400 seconds. The captain was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. And the deceleration when I reach the fortress? That's where the quantum phase technology becomes crucial, Dong-hyun explained. Normal matter hitting Nexus Prime's atmosphere at that speed would create an explosion visible from orbit. But a phased object can interact selectively with matter. The suit's systems will partially phase you back into normal space just enough to be affected by atmospheric drag, slowing you down gradually. He showed them a detailed view of the fortress world's atmosphere. The outer atmosphere is thin, which means you'll maintain high speed until reaching the dense lower layers. The suit's computer will calculate the exact phase shift percentages needed to achieve safe deceleration without becoming solid enough for the defensive systems to detect. Major Kyung-min shook his head. The timing for all of this has to be perfect. Launch timing, trajectory calculations, gravitational assists, shield gap windows, atmospheric entry, phase shift percentages. If any single element is wrong, the operative dies, Dong-hyun finished. Yes, that's correct. Captain Haiwan stood up and walked around the holographic display, studying it from different angles. What about navigation during the approach? How do I make course corrections if something goes wrong? You don't, Dong-hyun said simply. The insertion pod has minimal maneuvering capability because any significant thrust would alter the trajectory enough to miss the target. Once you launch, you're committed to the calculated path. So I'm basically a very expensive bullet fired at a very specific target, Haiwan said. That's actually a fairly accurate description, Dong-hyun admitted. Colonel Jiwoo activated, another display showing the layout of Nexus Prime itself. Assuming you survive the approach and entry, what happens once you're inside the fortress? The good news is that the quantum phase suit will make you effectively invisible to their internal security systems, Dong-hyun replied. You can walk through walls, energy barriers, and force fields. The bad news is that navigating inside a planet-sized fortress will be extremely difficult. He highlighted certain areas of the fortress layout. Our intelligence indicates that the council chamber is located in the central core, approximately 2,000 kilometers below the surface. The chamber is surrounded by multiple layers of security, each with different types of barriers and detection systems. How do I find it? Haiwan asked. The council chamber has massive artificial gravity generators to accommodate delegates from different worlds, Dong-hyun explained. These generators create a unique gravitational signature that should be detectable by the suit's sensors, even through several kilometers of solid rock and metal. Major Kyung-min pointed at the timeline, displayed on the screen. How long does the operative have once they're inside? The quantum phase suit's power supply will last approximately 6 hours under normal conditions, Dong-hyun said. But using the phase shift capability continuously will drain power much faster. Realistically, the operative will have maybe 2 hours to locate the council chamber, plant the beacon, and get back to a safe extraction point. Extraction point? Colonel Jiwoo asked. Dong-hyun's expression became uncomfortable. That's still being worked out. The same gravitational conditions that make insertion possible only occur once every 73 hours. The operative would need to survive on the fortress for that long before another extraction window opens. 73 hours on an enemy. Fortress world, wearing a suit with a 6-hour power supply, Haiwan said thoughtfully. The suit has backup power systems that can extend life support for up to a week, Dong-hyun said quickly. And there are areas inside the fortress where you could potentially find air and water. Our intelligence suggests there are maintenance areas and service tunnels that aren't heavily monitored. Captain Haiwan was quiet for several minutes, studying the entire plan from beginning to end. Finally, she looked up at the others. It's completely insane, she said. The odds of success are terrible. The margin for error is essentially 0, and even if everything goes perfectly, I'll be stranded on an enemy world for 3 days. Colonel Jiwoo waited for her to continue. When do we start? Haiwan asked with a slight smile. Lieutenant Dong-hyun began pulling up training schedules and equipment specifications. We have 17 days to prepare. You'll need to master the quantum phase suit, memorize the fortress layout, and practice high-speed atmospheric entry in the simulation chamber. Captain Haiwan floated in the cramped insertion pod, feeling the gentle vibration of the ship's engines as they approached the launch coordinates. Through the small window, she could see the twin stars of the Nexus system burning like angry eyes in the darkness. In just a few minutes, she would be launched toward those suns at incredible speed, beginning a journey that would either make history or end her life. The quantum phase suit felt strange against her skin. It was lighter than her normal combat armor, but covered every inch of her body in a material that seemed to shift between solid and liquid. Small displays inside her helmet showed power levels, life support status, and navigation data. Everything was green and ready. Final systems. Check! Came Lieutenant Dong Hyun's voice through her communication system. He was monitoring the mission from the ship's control room, watching dozens of screens that tracked gravitational fields, stellar radiation, and the precise position of Nexus Prime. All systems green, Haewon replied, running through her checklist. One more time. The beacon was secure in her equipment pack, along with emergency supplies and backup power cells. Her parachute was folded in its special compartment, modified to work in the alien atmosphere of the fortress world. Gravitational alignment is perfect, Dong-hyun reported. Stellar radiation is within acceptable limits. The shield gap window opens in exactly 4 hours, 12 minutes, and 36 seconds. Colonel Ji-woo's voice came through the communication system. How are you feeling, Captain? Haewon checked her straps and made sure all her equipment was secure. Ready to show these aliens what human paratroopers can do, ma'am. Remember, Major Kyung-min added, this isn't just about proving we can infiltrate their fortress. This is about showing them that humanity deserves respect. Understood, sir, Haewon replied. She had been thinking about exactly that during the past 3 weeks of training. Every simulation, every practice run, every test of the quantum phase. Suit had been preparation for this moment. The galaxy thought humans were primitive savages who jumped out of aircraft and hoped for the best. Today, she would prove them wrong. Launch in 60 seconds, Dong-hyun announced. All systems are optimal. Trajectory calculations confirmed. Captain, you are go for insertion. Haewon took a deep breath and activated the pod's internal systems. The small spacecraft would carry her most of the way to her target, using its own engines and navigation to follow the precise path that Dong-hyun had calculated. Only during the final approach to Nexus Prime would she separate from the pod and complete the mission on her own. 30 seconds, Dong-hyun counted down. Gravitational field strength is exactly where we need it. Stellar wind conditions are favorable. Through her window, Haewon could see the first star growing larger. In a few hours, her pod would pass close enough to that burning sphere to feel its incredible heat and radiation. The quantum phase suit would protect her, but the experience would be unlike anything any human had ever survived. 10 seconds, Dong-hyun announced. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, launch! The pod separated from the ship with a sharp jolt that pressed Haewon back into her seat. Small thrusters fired, pushing her away from the launch vessel and onto the trajectory that would carry her across the star system. Within seconds, the ship that had brought her here disappeared into the darkness behind her. Now she was alone, racing toward the first star at a speed that increased every second as gravity pulled her forward. The pod's navigation system showed her position on a three-dimensional map, with her actual path traced in green and the planned trajectory marked in blue. So far, everything was perfect. "Pod separation successful," she reported. "All systems nominal. Beginning first gravitational approach." "Copy that," came Dong Hyun's voice, though it was already growing faint as distance increased between her pod and the ship. "You're exactly on trajectory. First stellar approach in 2 hours, 40 minutes. Haewon settled back to wait. There was nothing to do now but monitor her systems and watch the stars grow larger. The pod flew itself, following the complex path that would use the gravity of both suns to accelerate her to the incredible speed needed to reach Nexus Prime, during the brief window when its shields would be vulnerable. As the hours passed, the first star grew from a point of light to a disk of fire that filled half her view. The pod's radiation sensors began registering dangerous levels of energy, but the quantum phase suit's shielding held firm. The temperature inside the pod rose despite the cooling systems working at maximum capacity. "Approaching first gravitational. Assist," Haewon reported, watching the navigation display show her path curving around the star. "Radiation levels are high but within acceptable limits. Heat shields are functioning normally. Looking good from here," Dong Hyun replied, his voice now distorted by the vast distance between them. "Velocity is increasing as planned. You should feel the acceleration peak in about 10 minutes. The pod began to vibrate as it encountered the star's outer atmosphere, wisps of superheated gas that extended millions of kilometers into space. Through her window, Haewon could see streams of plasma flowing across the star's surface like rivers of liquid fire. The sight was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Then the acceleration hit her like a giant hand pressing down on her chest. Even with the pod's inertial compensators working at full power, she felt the incredible force of gravity pulling her forward. Her speed increased dramatically as the pod whipped around the star, using its gravitational field like a slingshot, to hurl her toward the second sun. "First approach complete," she gasped, fighting to speak against the crushing acceleration. "Velocity is 3,200 kilometers per second and climbing, on course for second gravitational assist." "Outstanding," came Dong Hyun's faint reply. "You're actually ahead of the planned schedule by 12 seconds. That's well within acceptable margins." The first star fell away behind her, but the pod was now moving so fast that the second star grew visible ahead of her within just a few hours. This approach would be even more dangerous. She would pass much closer to the stellar surface, and the acceleration forces would be even greater. As she approached the second star, Haewon began her final preparations. In just a few hours, she would separate from the pod and complete the approach to Nexus Prime on her own. The quantum phase suit would keep her alive in the vacuum of space, but she would be traveling at speeds that no human had ever experienced. "Second stellar approach beginning," she reported. "All systems still green, preparing for maximum acceleration phase." This time, the gravitational forces were so strong that the pod's structure groaned under the stress. Haewon felt as if she weighed 10 times normal as the star's gravity seized her and flung her toward her target. Through the window, she could see the star's surface rushing past, a sea of nuclear fire that could have vaporized her entire home planet. But the pod held together, and the quantum phase suit kept her alive through radiation that would have killed her instantly without protection. When the acceleration finally ended, she was moving at nearly 30,000 kilometers per second, fast enough to cross the entire solar system in just a few hours. "Second approach complete," she reported, her voice shaky from the tremendous forces she had just experienced. "Final velocity achieved. Nexus Prime is now visible on sensors." Ahead of her, the fortress world appeared as a small disk of light against the stars. As she watched, it grew larger and larger until she could make out the shapes of cities and weapon installations on its surface. The entire planet was a military base, defended by shields and weapons that the galaxy considered impregnable. Shield. "Gap window opens in 37 minutes. Dong Hyun's voice came through her communications, now barely audible through the interference from the twin stars. "Prepare for pod separation and final approach." HFY activated the quantum phase suit's full systems. Immediately, she felt a strange tingling sensation as the technology began shifting her partially out of normal space. Her hands became slightly transparent, and she could see through the solid walls of the pod as if they were made of glass. "Quantum phase activation successful," she reported. "All suit systems operating normally. Ready for separation." "Copy that. You are go for final approach. Good luck, Captain." The pod's separation charges fired, and suddenly HFY was alone in the vacuum of space, racing toward Nexus Prime at impossible speed. The quantum phase suit kept her alive and invisible to the fortress world's sensors, but she was now just a human body hurtling through space faster than any spacecraft. Ahead of her, she could see the energy shields surrounding Nexus Prime, brilliant fields of force that could vaporize anything that touched them. But Dong Hyun's calculations had been perfect. As she approached, tiny gaps appeared in the barriers, exactly where and when he had predicted. HFY passed through the shields like a ghost, her phased form slipping between dimensions to bypass the fortress world's most powerful defenses. She was inside the defensive perimeter, falling toward the planet's surface at tremendous speed. "Shield penetration successful," she reported, though she doubted anyone could hear her now. "Beginning atmospheric entry." The alien atmosphere hit her like a wall, but the quantum phase suit automatically adjusted her density to create just enough drag to. Captain HFY landed softly in what appeared to be a maintenance courtyard deep within the fortress complex. Her parachute dissolved automatically upon contact with the ground, leaving no trace of her arrival. Around her, massive alien structures rose into the artificial sky like metal mountains, their surfaces covered with weapons, sensors, and energy conduits that pulsed with strange light. She remained motionless for several minutes, studying her surroundings through the quantum phase. Suit sensors. The courtyard was surrounded by walls that stretched hundreds of meters into the air, patrolled by floating security drones that moved in precise patterns. Energy barriers flickered between guard towers, creating a deadly maze of defensive systems. Any Normal intruder would have been detected and eliminated within seconds. But the quantum phase suit made her effectively invisible. The security sensors looked right through her phased form, registering nothing more dangerous than a slight breeze. Moving through the courtyard. "Phase shift holding steady," she whispered into her communicator, though she knew the signal probably wouldn't reach the human ship across the vast distances of space. Beginning infiltration of primary structure, she stood up and walked towards the nearest wall, a massive barrier made of some kind of alien metal that gleamed with an inner light. As she approached, she could see her reflection becoming fainter and more transparent. The quantum phase technology was working perfectly, allowing her to exist partially outside normal space. Heywan pressed her hand against the metal wall. It felt solid for a moment. Then her fingers began to sink through the material as if it were thick water. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, walking through the barrier that was designed to stop the most advanced weapons in the galaxy. The sensation was strange and uncomfortable. For a few seconds, she existed inside the solid wall, surrounded by the molecular structure of alien metal. She could see the atoms arranged in complex patterns around her, glowing with energy that her suit's sensors identified as some kind of quantum stabilization field. Then she emerged on the other side, standing in a corridor that stretched away into the distance. The hallway was enormous, clearly designed for species much larger than humans. The ceiling was at least 50 meters high, supported by pillars. That looked like they could hold up mountains. Alien guards moved through the corridor, some walking on multiple legs, others floating in globes of liquid, and a few that appeared to be made of pure energy contained in mechanical bodies. Heywan pressed herself against the wall as a patrol of Krek's soldiers marched past. These were the same species as General Vex, tall and powerful with 6 arms and stone-like skin. They carried weapons that hummed with barely contained energy, devices that could probably level entire city blocks. But they walked right past her. Without noticing anything unusual, she followed the corridor deeper into the complex, occasionally phasing through walls and barriers when the direct path was blocked. The fortress was like a 3-dimensional maze, with passages that went up, down, and sideways through the structure. Some areas were filled with alien atmosphere that burned her lungs even through the suit's filters. Others contained vacuum, or gases that would have been instantly fatal to human life. After an hour of careful movement, she reached what appeared to be a main transportation hub. Massive tubes stretched in all directions, carrying pods filled with alien passengers at incredible speeds. The quantum phase suit's sensors detected gravitational signatures from these transport systems, but none of them matched the pattern that Lieutenant Dong-hyun had described for the council chamber. "Need to go deeper," she muttered, studying the architectural plans that had been loaded into her suit's memory. According to their intelligence, the council chamber was located in the fortress's central core, surrounded by multiple layers of security and defensive systems. She found an access shaft that led downward into the planet's interior. The shaft was filled with maintenance drones that flew up and down in constant streams, servicing the fortress's systems. Heywan stepped into the shaft and let herself fall, using the quantum phase suit's limited flight capability to control her descent. As she dropped through level after level of the fortress, she began to see just how massive this place really was. Entire floors were dedicated to weapon systems that could destroy spacecraft in orbit. Other levels contained barracks for armies of alien soldiers. She passed through factories that manufactured ammunition and equipment, laboratories where alien scientists worked on new technologies, and command centers where military officers coordinated defenses across entire star systems. The deeper she went, the more impressive the security became. Energy barriers that could slice through starship armor, gravity fields that could crush an intruder into a ball of compressed matter, sensor networks so advanced they could detect a single atom out of place, all of it useless against someone who existed partially outside normal space. After 2 hours of descent, her suit's sensors finally detected the gravitational signature she was looking for. The artificial gravity generators that powered the council chamber created a unique pattern of space-time distortion, exactly as Dong-hyun had predicted. The chamber was still several kilometers below her position, but she was on the right track. She continued downward, now moving through areas that were clearly more secure than the upper levels. The corridors here were patrolled by elite guards from multiple species, all carrying weapons that her suit identified as capable of destroying small moons. Automated defense systems tracked every movement with sensors that could see through solid matter, detect quantum fluctuations, and identify threats based on genetic patterns. But none of them could see her. The quantum phase technology kept her invisible to every scanning method the aliens had developed. She was a ghost moving through their most secure facility, undetected and unstoppable. The architectural style changed as she descended into the fortress's core. The utilitarian military design of the upper levels gave way to something more ceremonial and impressive. The walls were covered with artwork from dozens of different alien cultures. Statues of famous council members stood in alcoves lit by energy that made them seem to glow with inner light. This was clearly an area designed to impress visitors and demonstrate the council's power and authority. Haewon paused at an intersection of corridors, checking her suit's power levels. She had been using the quantum phase capability for over 3 hours, and the energy drain was significant. The suit still had enough power for several more hours of operation, but she needed to be careful about conserving energy for the return journey. She chose the corridor that led most directly toward the gravitational signatures she was tracking. As she walked, she passed through multiple security checkpoints, each one more sophisticated than the last. Force fields that could stop antimatter weapons, scanning systems that analyzed everything down to the subatomic level, guard posts manned by soldiers whose species were legendary throughout the galaxy for their combat abilities, all of them useless against a human paratrooper with the right technology. Finally, after 4 hours of careful infiltration, she reached the outer perimeter of the council chamber complex. The gravitational signatures were now so strong that she could feel them through the quantum phase suit. Massive artificial gravity generators were working somewhere nearby, creating the stable environment needed for representatives from dozens of different worlds to meet safely. The security here was unlike anything she had encountered in the upper levels. The walls themselves seemed to be alive, constantly scanning and analyzing everything around them. Energy patterns flowed through the floors and ceilings like electronic nervous systems. The air was filled with microscopic surveillance, devices that could track individual molecules, but most impressive of all were the guards. These weren't ordinary soldiers, but members of the Council's elite protection force. Each one was selected from the finest warriors of their respective species and enhanced with technology that made them nearly invincible. They moved with perfect coordination, their weapons and armor integrated with the fortress's defensive systems to create an impenetrable barrier around the council chamber. HFY watched them for several minutes, studying their patrol patterns and looking for any weakness. In their coverage, there wasn't one. The elite guards had been trained to expect attacks from every possible direction, using every conceivable method. Their defense was perfect against conventional threats, but they had never faced a quantum-phased human paratrooper. She stepped forward, walking directly toward the main entrance to the council chamber complex. The guard sensors swept over her position, but detected nothing. Their enhanced vision looked right through her phased form. Their weapons, calibrated to destroy the most advanced threats in the galaxy, couldn't even see their target. As she approached the final barrier before the council chamber itself, HFY allowed herself a small smile. The aliens had laughed at human paratroopers, calling them primitive warriors who jumped from aircraft and hoped for the best. In just a few more minutes, she would prove that human ingenuity could overcome even the most advanced alien technology. The fortress world of Nexus Prime was about to learn that sometimes the most sophisticated defenses could. The enormous doors of the council chamber stood open, revealing the vast spherical room where representatives from 47 different species gathered to make decisions that affected the entire galaxy. General Vex stood at the center podium, his 6 arms gesturing dramatically as he addressed the assembled delegates. His voice carried clearly through the chamber's advanced acoustic system. The security improvements to Nexus Prime are now complete, the Crex General announced with obvious pride. Our new quantum detection grids can identify threats as small as individual atoms. Our gravitational field generators can crush any unauthorized object into subatomic particles. Our energy barriers now operate on 17 different dimensional frequencies simultaneously. The alien delegates listened with varying degrees of attention. Some, like the crystalline Helios representatives, flickered with colors that indicated satisfaction. Others, including the massive Vorthak delegation, nodded their approval with deep rumbling sounds. The insect-like Zerg clicked their approval, while the energy beings from the Plasma Collective pulsed with bright patterns of agreement. Ambassador Te-Ho sat in the observation section reserved for non-council species, his face carefully neutral despite the anger he felt inside. 3 weeks had passed since Earth's application for membership had been rejected with mockery and laughter. He was only here now because diplomatic protocol required him to attend sessions where humanity might be discussed. Furthermore, General, Vex continued, we have enhanced our patrol systems throughout the fortress. Elite guards from 12 different species now work together using integrated communication networks. Every corridor, every room, every ventilation shaft is under constant surveillance. The general activated a holographic display that showed cross-sections of the fortress world. Red dots indicated guard positions, blue lines showed sensor coverage, and green fields marked the areas protected by various defensive systems. The display made it clear that nothing could move through Nexus Prime without being detected and tracked. The result, General Vex declared, is a fortress that is absolutely impregnable. Not even the legendary ghost soldiers of ancient mythology could penetrate our defenses. Several delegates made sounds of amusement at this reference. The ghost soldiers were a myth shared by many species. Stories of warriors who could walk through walls and become invisible to any detection system. Most civilized species had similar legends in their ancient histories, tales told to children about impossible warriors from a more primitive time. The council's speaker, the silver-skinned being with 4 arms, gestured for attention. General Vex, while we appreciate these security improvements, we must discuss more pressing matters. The quarantine of the Sol system, for example. Ambassador Tae-ho straightened in his seat. This was why he had been required to attend. The council was about to discuss humanity's fate. The species that calls itself human, the speaker continued, has been deemed insufficiently advanced for council membership. However, their aggressive nature and rapid technological development make them a potential threat to galactic stability. Rumble of agreement came from the Vorthax section. Their delegate, the massive bear-like creature who had mocked human paratroopers 3 weeks earlier, stood to address the chamber. These humans are dangerous precisely because they are primitive, the Vorthax declared. They think in terms of violence and conquest, rather than civilized cooperation. Their military doctrine is based on crude tactics like dropping soldiers from aircraft. Such thinking could destabilize our peaceful galaxy. The Helios delegate flickered with patterns of agreement. Their technology is advancing rapidly, but their wisdom lags far behind. They could develop weapons of mass destruction without the cultural maturity to use them responsibly. Ambassador Tae-ho wanted to respond, to defend his species against these accusations. But protocol prevented him from speaking unless directly addressed. He could only sit and listen as the alien delegates discussed humanity's future like they were debating the fate of laboratory animals. General Vex returned to the podium. I propose we extend the quarantine of the Sol system indefinitely. Human spacecraft will be prevented from leaving their home system until they demonstrate significant cultural and technological advancement. This could take several centuries, by which time they may have evolved beyond their current primitive state. The debate continued for over an hour, with various delegates offering their opinions on the human problem. Some suggested complete isolation, cutting off all contact with humanity until they proved themselves worthy. Others proposed limited monitoring, allowing human development to continue under careful observation. A few even suggested more extreme measures, though these were quickly dismissed as unnecessary. Throughout the discussion, none of the delegates noticed anything unusual about their secure chamber. The advanced detection systems continued their constant scanning, but found nothing out of the ordinary. The elite guards maintained their perfect patrol patterns, watching for any sign of intrusion. The energy barriers hummed at their full power, ready to vaporize any unauthorized presence. Above them all, in the ventilation system that provided air to the massive chamber, Captain Haywan hung motionless in her quantum-phased state. She had been listening to the debate for over an hour, her anger growing with every dismissive comment about human primitive nature and dangerous tendencies. Through her suit's enhanced vision, she could see every detail of the chamber below. The curved walls rose in perfect arcs to meet at the top, creating a sphere large enough to contain several city blocks. Gravity generators in the floor created different zones of gravitational pull to accommodate species from various worlds. The air itself was carefully controlled, with different atmospheric mixes flowing to different sections of the chamber. Most importantly, she could see the central podium where General Vex continued his presentation about fortress security. That would be the perfect place to plant the beacon, right where the arrogant general was boasting about his impregnable defenses. The improvements to our detection systems, General Vex was saying, make it impossible for any intruder to approach this chamber undetected. Our sensors can now identify quantum signatures, dimensional anomalies, and even theoretical phase shift technologies that exist only in scientific speculation. Haywan almost laughed at the irony. The general was describing exactly the technology she was using to spy on their most secure meeting, yet their sensors couldn't detect her presence just a few meters above his head. The debate about humanity's quarantine was reaching its conclusion. Delegate after delegate voted to extend the isolation of Earth's solar system. The Vorthak voted for complete isolation. The Helios supported limited monitoring. The Krex military faction, led by General Vex, favored indefinite quarantine with possible military intervention if humans developed dangerous technologies. Ambassador Tejo sat in silence as his species' fate was decided by beings who considered humans too primitive to join galactic civilization. His diplomatic training kept his expression neutral, but Haywan could see the pain and frustration in his posture. Finally, the council speaker called for a formal vote. All those in favor of extending the quarantine of the Sol system indefinitely indicate your decision now. One by one, the species representatives voted. The display board showed the results in real time. 43 votes in favor of continued quarantine, 0 votes against, and 4 abstentions. It was a crushing defeat for humanity's hopes of joining the galactic community. The motion passes, the council speaker announced. The Sol system will remain under quarantine until further review. The earliest possible reconsideration will be in 50 standard years. General Vex smiled with satisfaction. I will coordinate with our fleet commanders to ensure the quarantine is properly enforced. Any human vessel that attempts to leave their system will be turned back, or if necessary, destroyed. The session was nearly over. Soon the delegates would leave the chamber, and Haywan would lose her opportunity to plant the beacon. She began, moving through the ventilation system, positioning herself directly above the central podium where General Vex stood. As she prepared for the final phase of her mission, she listened to the general's closing remarks about fortress security and human primitiveness. In just a few minutes, she would drop through the chamber's ceiling and prove that everything he had said about impregnable defenses was completely wrong. The aliens thought they understood warfare. They believed their advanced technology made them invincible. They had dismissed human military tactics as primitive and worthless. Captain Haiwan was about to teach them a lesson they would never forget, that sometimes the most sophisticated defenses could be defeated by a simple paratrooper with the courage to jump into the impossible. General Vex raised all 6 of his arms in a gesture of absolute confidence. The Krex general's stone-like skin gleamed under the chamber's lights as he prepared to deliver his final statement about fortress security. The assembled delegates from 47 species watched him with varying degrees of attention, most of them already satisfied that the human question had been properly resolved. In conclusion, General Vex declared, his voice carrying to every corner of the massive spherical chamber, I can state with complete certainty that this fortress is absolutely impervious to any ground assault. No warrior, no matter how skilled or well-equipped, could possibly breach our defenses and reach this chamber. The general paused for dramatic effect, his 6 arms spread wide. The age of primitive ground warfare is over. The era of soldiers dropping from the sky to attack fortified positions belongs to the distant past. Any species that still relies on such outdated tactics will find themselves helpless against modern defensive technology. Several delegates made sounds of agreement. The crystalline Helios representatives flickered with satisfied colors. The massive Vorthak delegation rumbled their approval. Even the floating aquatic depth species gurgled approvingly from within their pressurized tanks. Ambassador Tae-ho sat motionless in the observation section, his face carefully neutral, despite the anger burning inside him. The vote to extend Earth's quarantine had been devastating enough, but listening to General Vex mock human military capabilities was almost unbearable. The improvements we have made to Nexus Prime, the general continued, represent the pinnacle of defensive engineering. Our quantum detection grids, gravitational field generators, and multi-dimensional energy barriers create a security system that is literally impossible to overcome through conventional means. High above in the ventilation system, Captain Haiwan checked her equipment one final time. The beacon was secure in her pack, her parachute was properly folded, and the quantum phase suit was functioning perfectly. She had been listening to General Vex's boasts for 20 minutes, waiting for the right moment to make her dramatic entrance. Furthermore, General Vex said, warming to his favorite subject, even if some hypothetical intruder could somehow bypass our outer defenses, they would face the elite guards who protect this chamber. These warriors represent the finest soldiers from 12 different species, equipped with weapons that could destroy small moons and armor that could withstand direct hits from battleship cannons. The elite guards standing around the chamber's perimeter stood a little straighter at this praise. They were indeed impressive specimens, towering Krex soldiers with multiple arms, swift Zerg warriors with razor-sharp claws, floating Helios beings made of living crystal, and others whose species were legendary throughout the galaxy for their combat abilities. No ground-based assault force could possibly penetrate this chamber, General Vex concluded with absolute conviction. The very idea is laughable. We might as well worry about being attacked by the mythical ghost soldiers of ancient legend. That was the moment Captain HFY had been waiting for. She positioned herself directly above the central podium and activated her parachute deployment system. The chamber's artificial atmosphere would provide enough air resistance to slow her descent, while the quantum phase suit would keep her invisible until the perfect moment. Therefore, General Vex continued, completely unaware of what was about to happen, I recommend that we consider the human threat to be effectively neutralized. Their primitive military doctrine poses no danger to... He never finished the sentence. The chamber's ceiling was nearly 100 meters above the floor, designed to accommodate the largest species in the council. Most delegates barely noticed when a small section of the overhead ventilation system seemed to shimmer slightly. The advanced detection grids registered nothing unusual. The gravitational field sensors detected no unauthorized objects. Then Captain HFY phased back into normal space. Her parachute bloomed above her like a flower of white silk, appearing from nowhere in the artificial atmosphere of the chamber. She dropped through the air with perfect control, her descent trajectory aimed directly at the central podium, where General Vex stood frozen in shock. For a moment, absolute silence filled the chamber. 47 different species, each with their own ways of expressing surprise, stared in complete disbelief as a human figure in strange armor fell gracefully toward the floor. The sight was so impossible, so utterly beyond anything they had expected that their minds struggled to process what they were seeing. General Vex looked up at the descending figure, his 6 arms still spread wide in his gesture of confidence. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. The greatest military mind in the galaxy, the being who had just declared their fortress absolutely impregnable, was watching a human soldier parachute into his secure chamber. Elite guards were the first to react. Years of training kicked in as they raised their weapons and began scanning for threats, but their advanced targeting systems couldn't lock onto the falling human. The quantum phase suit was shifting rapidly between dimensional states, making Captain HFY nearly impossible for their weapons to track. Impossible, General Vex finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. Captain HFY landed with perfect technique in the center of the circular assembly, her parachute collapsing gracefully around her. She stood up slowly, looking around at the stunned faces of delegates from across the galaxy. Through her helmet's transparent visor, they could see that she was unmistakably human and unmistakably alive, despite having somehow penetrated the most secure facility in known space. Chaos erupted throughout the chamber. Delegates leaped to their feet, making sounds of alarm in dozens of different languages. The Vorthak delegation roared challenges and threats. The Helios beings flashed in rapid patterns of confusion and fear. The insect-like Zerg clicked frantically to each other, their compound eyes fixed on the impossible intruder. The elite guards rushed forward, their weapons charging with deadly energy. But as they fired, their shots passed harmlessly through Captain HFY's form. She phased in and out of normal space, becoming translucent one moment and solid the next, always staying just out of reach of their attacks. She walked calmly through their defensive formations, completely ignoring the weapons that should have vaporized her instantly. Energy beams that could cut through starship armor passed through her like she was made of air. Gravity weapons designed to crush mountains had no effect on her phased form. General Vex stumbled backward as the human approached his podium. "Guards! Stop her! Use the quantum disruptors! Activate the dimensional anchors!" The guards tried every weapon and defensive system at their disposal. Quantum disruptors fired streams of energy designed to destabilize unusual matter states. Dimensional anchors attempted to lock her into normal space where she could be targeted. Gravitational fields tried to crush her against the floor. Nothing worked. Captain HFY continued her calm walk toward the central podium, occasionally becoming solid enough to be seen clearly before phasing back into her translucent state. She moved like a ghost through the most advanced military technology the galaxy had ever developed. The Council speaker, recovering from her initial shock, activated the chamber's emergency protocols. Massive blast doors began sliding shut around the chamber's exits. Energy barriers sprang up to prevent any escape. Additional guards poured in through hidden passages, adding their firepower to the desperate attempt to stop the intruder. Captain HFY reached the podium where General Vex stood, paralyzed with disbelief. She pulled the beacon from her equipment pack and placed it carefully on the speaking platform, right where the general had been boasting about his impregnable defenses just moments before. The beacon activated automatically, projecting a holographic message that appeared in the air. Above the assembly, the image showed the insignia of Earth's military forces, followed by text that appeared in the native languages of all 47 species present. "Greetings from Earth's paratroopers," the message read. "No harm intended. Consider this a diplomatic gift from the primitive species you rejected. We hope this demonstration proves that human soldiers are not quite as backward as you believed." The beacon began transmitting detailed technical specifications of Captain HFY's infiltration method. Holographic displays showed the quantum phase technology, the gravitational slingshot trajectory between the twin stars, the precise timing required to penetrate the shield gaps, and the atmospheric entry calculations that had made the mission possible. General Vex stared at the data streaming through the air around him. The quantum phase technology represented a breakthrough that was decades ahead of current galactic science. The trajectory calculations required mathematical precision, beyond what most species thought possible. The mission planning showed a level of strategic thinking that rivaled the greatest military minds in the galaxy. "This is impossible," he repeated, but his voice lacked conviction now. The evidence was right in front of him, transmitted by a beacon planted in his secure chamber by a human who had somehow traveled between stars and walked through his defenses like they didn't exist. Captain HFY stepped back from the podium and looked around at the council chamber. Remained frozen in stunned silence for nearly a full minute after Captain HFY disappeared. General Vex stood at the central podium, staring at the beacon that now sat where he had been boasting about his impregnable defenses. The holographic data streaming from the device continued to display the technical specifications of the human infiltration, each detail more impossible than the last. The Krex General's 6 arms trembled slightly as he reached toward the beacon, then pulled back as if it might explode. The device was small and unremarkable looking, but it represented the complete collapse of everything he thought he knew about military science. Quantum phase technology, he whispered, reading the technical displays that floated in the air around him. Gravitational trajectory calculations, multi-dimensional existence states. This is decades beyond our current capabilities. The council speaker was the first to break the silence. Her 4 silver arms gestured for attention, though most delegates were already staring at her in shocked confusion. "All guards, stand down," she ordered. "The intruder has withdrawn. Secure the chamber and begin a full analysis of what just occurred." The elite guards slowly lowered their weapons, though they continued scanning the chamber for any sign of the human who had walked through their defenses like they were made of paper. Their advanced sensors detected nothing, but after what they had just witnessed, none of them trusted their equipment anymore. The Vorthak delegate who had mocked human paratroopers 3 weeks earlier rose slowly from his seat. The massive bear-like creature's fur was standing on end, a sign of extreme agitation in his species. "How?" he rumbled, his voice filled with disbelief. "How did a primitive falling warrior penetrate defenses that should stop entire fleets?" General Vex was studying the beacon's data streams with growing amazement. "She didn't just penetrate our defenses," he said quietly. "She traveled between the twin stars to get here. Look at these trajectory calculations. She used gravitational assists from both suns to build up the velocity needed to reach our planet during the shield gap window." The crystalline Helios delegate flickered with rapid color changes that indicated extreme confusion. "Shield gap window? Our barriers are continuous and unbreachable." "Apparently not," General Vex replied, his voice hollow. "The gravitational fluctuations from the binary star system create microscopic openings in our shields. Openings that we never detected because we never imagined anyone could be precise enough to exploit them." Lieutenant Dong Hyun's calculations were displayed for all to see, showing the complex mathematics required to plot a course between 2 stars with perfect timing. The numbers filled dozens of holographic screens, representing months of careful analysis and preparation. The insect-like Zerg delegate clicked frantically. "The precision required for this mission is beyond our comprehension." The timing had to be perfect to within seconds across a journey of billions of kilometers. "And that's just the approach," General Vex said, scrolling through more of the technical data. "Once she reached our planet, she had to phase through our shields using technology that exists partially outside normal space-time. Then she infiltrated our fortress, passed through walls and barriers that should have been solid, avoided detection by sensors that can track individual atoms, and somehow located this chamber despite having never been inside our facility before." The aquatic depth representative gurgled from within his pressurized tank. "This quantum phase technology, it allows matter to exist in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. We have theorized about such capabilities, but considered them impossible to achieve." "Impossible," General Vex repeated, then gestured at the beacon still sitting on his podium. "Yet here is the proof that humans have not only achieved it, but weaponized it for military infiltration." Ambassador Tae Ho stood up slowly in the observation section. All eyes turned to him as he walked toward the Central Assembly, his diplomatic immunity allowing him to approach despite the security alert. "Honored delegates," he said calmly, "I believe there has been a serious misunderstanding about my species' capabilities." The council speaker gestured for him to continue. "Ambassador Tejo, did your government authorize this demonstration?" "I was not informed of the specific details," Tejo replied truthfully, "but I suspect this mission was designed to correct some misconceptions that arose during our previous session." The Vorthak delegate snarled. "Your warrior could have killed us all. She bypassed every security system we possess." "Yet she harmed no one," Tejo pointed out. "Captain Haywan could have planted a bomb instead of a beacon. She could have eliminated key personnel or stolen classified information. Instead, she chose to deliver a peaceful message demonstrating that human primitive jumping is perhaps more sophisticated than you initially believed." General Vex was still studying the technical data, his military mind analyzing every aspect of the mission. "The level of planning required for this operation is extraordinary. Your people calculated gravitational fields, stellar radiation patterns, atmospheric composition, fortress architecture, security patrol schedules, and quantum physics interactions, all to deliver a single message. A message," the Helios delegate flickered, "that proves our most secure facility is not secure at all." "Actually," General Vex said, surprising everyone, "it proves something far more important." He activated the chamber's main display system, projecting the beacon's data for all delegates to see clearly. "This mission represents a perfect fusion of advanced scientific theory and practical military application," the general explained. "The humans took theoretical physics that exists only in our research laboratories and combined it with traditional insertion tactics to create something entirely new." He highlighted specific sections of the technical data. "Look at how they adapted standard paratrooper equipment to work with quantum phase technology. Notice how they modified atmospheric entry techniques to account for multidimensional existence, states. See how they integrated ancient infiltration methods with cutting-edge science." The energy being from the plasma collective pulsed with thoughtful patterns. They did not simply develop new technology. They reimagined how existing technology could be used. "Exactly," General Vex said, his admiration for the mission growing as he understood its complexity. "We focused on building better walls, stronger barriers, more sensitive sensors. The humans looked at our defenses and asked themselves, what if walls don't matter? What if barriers can be bypassed? What if sensors can't detect what exists outside? Normal space?" The council speaker studied the beacon's data for several minutes before speaking. "Ambassador Tejo, this quantum phase technology represents a significant military advantage. Why has Earth not used it for conquest or territorial expansion?" "Because," Tejo replied, "despite your concerns about human aggressive tendencies, we prefer to use our capabilities for exploration and diplomacy rather than war. This demonstration was designed to earn respect, not to threaten or intimidate." The chamber fell quiet as delegates absorbed this information. The Zerg delegate was the first to speak. "We have made an error in judgment. This species possesses capabilities that could revolutionize military strategy throughout the galaxy. More than that, General Vex said, finally stepping away from the beacon. They have shown us that innovation comes not from building bigger and better versions of existing technology, but from thinking about problems in completely new ways. The council speaker called for order. In light of this demonstration, I believe we must reconsider our previous decision regarding Earth's application for council membership. A murmur of agreement swept through the chamber. Even the Vorthak delegate nodded slowly, though he still looked shaken by what he had witnessed. Furthermore, the speaker continued, I propose we invite Earth to share their quantum phase technology with the Council in exchange for full membership and access to our scientific resources. The vote was swift and unanimous. 47 species that had rejected humanity just hours earlier now voted to welcome Earth into the galactic community. The beacon had accomplished in minutes what years of diplomatic negotiations had failed to achieve. 6 months later, Colonel Jiwoo stood in a training facility on Nexus Prime, watching a mixed-species squad of paratroopers practice quantum phase insertion techniques. Former enemies now worked together, sharing knowledge and learning from each other. Captain Hei-Wan served as the primary instructor, teaching alien soldiers how to combine traditional airborne tactics with advanced physics. Her students included Krex warriors, Helios beings, Zerg fighters, and representatives from dozens of other species. Remember, she told her class, technology is just a tool. The real advantage comes from thinking creatively about how to use it. General Vex, now serving as the Council's new Director of Strategic Innovation, watched the training exercises with satisfaction. The fortress world that had once seemed impregnable was now the center of a new kind of warfare, one that emphasized adaptability and creative thinking over brute force. Ambassador Tejo was right, he said to Colonel Jiwoo. Your species does offer unique perspectives that benefit the entire council. Jiwoo smiled as she watched her former captain leading the galaxy's first mixed-species paratrooper unit.